Thanks everyone for being here today. I am super excited. Um, I miss seeing everyone in person. Hopefully we can get back in person soon. And hopefully I'll be able to see a lot of you in person at All Things Open or another conference this year. But for now, this is what we've got, and I'm excited to interact with everyone, at least in chat. I love the interactivity of talks, so I'm excited, hopefully, to get some questions and get a little bit of that. I do miss being able to look out into the audience of everyone. So I'm digitally looking out over the audience right now. So I'm going to talk about owning your development career. Giving yourself the gift of intentionality in your career. Before I get into it, a little bit about me. I am a web developer. My role now is a development lead. So I manage a small team of developers at a company in Wake Forest, North Carolina called Steadfast Design firm. We're right outside of Raleigh. And then some of my favorite technologies are Vue, Tailwind, and Craft. I'm generally kind of on the front end, but I don't write a lot of code these days because I've been doing more management, which is super, super fun. I really enjoy it. And it's a passion of mine, is kind of helping others achieve their goals and work at their best. So that's kind of where this talk is coming from. The perspective I'm bringing to the table is myself as a manager, as a lead of our development team. What do I think would help the people on my team excel? Like, now, if I went back to being an individual contributor from being a manager, what would I do differently? Because I worked for a good amount of years as an individual contributor, really enjoyed that as well. But now, having been a manager, going back, I think I would do some things differently. I think I would be able to drive my career more intentionally and do things outside of just coding, outside of just kind of the day-to-day technical pieces, do some things better to allow me to excel faster, to be more comfortable in my role, and to help my team succeed. So this is from that perspective, and we're going to jump right in. The first tip that I have is manage up. This is where I would normally ask how many people have heard this term, but I would be interested in the chat if you guys want to drop if you've heard of the term manage up. I'd be interested to look back and see. I think it's a common term kind of in business, especially in the corporate world, but not everyone's heard of it. And I think it's a really important concept. I also want to kind of disclaim that some of these pieces of this talk assume that you have a good manager, assume that you have a healthy work relationships, but some of them don't. A lot of the concepts, including managing up, applies even if you don't have a good boss, even if you don't have a boss who you're aligned with, even if you're in an organization with some dysfunction or something like that. So don't tune out if you're hearing these and you're like, wow, that's going to require a lot of trust. That's going to require a lot of vulnerability, because a lot of these pieces actually help you deal with any managerial situation you're in, and they allow you to kind of own your career no matter what situation you're in. So let's talk more about managing up. I found a quote on betterup.com, which had some really, really helpful stuff on managing and managing yourself. And it said managing up is essentially when a direct report, so, an individual contributor, most likely, through a positive relationship. So again, that speaks a little bit to you do need to have a positive relationship or cultivate a positive relationship, is able to make the job of their supervisor easier. It's all about creating value for your boss. And in turn, they guide you to be the best employee possible. So following up on that, this is about making yourself an easy person to manage. Doing that is one of the fastest ways to be seen as valuable within an organization. If you can, bring value to your boss, take things off of his or her plate, and be an easy person to manage. That's not someone that requires, 20 hours a week to manage, whatever it is. That is a really, really fast way to be seen as valuable within an organization. And that's good for a lot of reasons. Providing value within your organization and providing value to your team, one, helps your team hit its goals, which hopefully you want to happen. Hopefully you are plugged into your team, you are plugged into its goals, and you want those things to happen. But it's also just great for you personally. Being seen as valuable and easy to manage will help you move up to that next role, will help you be able to take on bigger, better projects that are more fun to work on and provide more value. And then it also helps your compensation. Like, if you're an easy person to manage, you're seen as very valuable, the organization's going to realize that they need to compensate you well to keep you there. So this is super, super valuable for your career. So I would take the time to think about, like, am I an easy person to manage? How much does it take for for my boss to get value out of me? Is it a little bit of time? Is it a lot of time? I think that's a really important question. Um, the intersection of your success and your manager's success is where magic happens, and where your opportunities for fulfilling impact lie. So this kind of speaks to that same thing. Your success and your manager's success, you need to find where those intersect, and that's where you need to live. And I put team success, I added that into this quote because I think that's what we should all be striving for. Like, we should be a part of a team, and you shouldn't just be striving for your personal success. Neither should your manager. You should both be on the same page and have the same goals in mind to drive towards your team success, which will be good for both of you, good for your team. And that's hopefully what you want to do. You want to be, if your team is doing something valuable, if your team is doing something that provides value to the world, then you want your team to succeed, and you want that to be kind of, that's fulfilling for you. So I think that's important. Finding out where that intersection is and spending most of your time there is really, really important. So that's kind of the framework for like why you would managing up, what it is. Let's talk about some practical tips. Number one, understand the goal. Only by knowing the outcome your manager wants can you actually manage yourself to meet and exceed their expectation. So imagine you're put on a project, and you jump into it and you deliver it in, say, 2 weeks, and that was maybe the project deadline was like a week and a half, right? So you didn't understand that the goal was to deliver on time. Or you deliver a project that maybe you spend, say it's like a 4-week project, and you spend 3 weeks on it, and you deliver it early, which is awesome, because maybe the last time you heard like, hey, you need to deliver projects earlier. So you deliver early, but the work is kind of shoddy. Like, you don't take the time to tune in the specific details of the project. That all comes from just not understanding the goal. So to help your manager and to really be able to own your own career, to be able to own your role within a company, you have to understand the business goals, your team goals, and your manager's goals. If you understand those things, then you can actually make decisions for yourself the same way that your manager would make decisions for you. If you ask them, if you said, hey, how much time should I spend on this? How much time should I spend on this? Like, at what level of quality should we deliver this product versus efficiency or time? You can ask your manager all those questions, and those are actually great questions to ask, especially before you understand the goals fully. But if you actually understand the goal of the team and you understand kind of the broad vision, then you can answer all those things for yourself and drive your career forward yourself. And then you can meet and exceed those goals because you actually know what they are. So if you know that your manager's top priority is profitability for the month, maybe to the exclusion of some other things, you can meet and exceed that goal by spending your time really being efficient versus maybe learning new stuff. And then the next month or the next quarter, you spend kind of buckling down and growing in your skills. But in that month, quarter, whatever it is, you just work on being efficient, because that's what the business goals are. So that's really important. Understanding your manager's goals will help you be able to do those things. Number two, align on priorities. This kind of plays into the last one. I've framed some of these kind of descriptions that you'll see on the slides as questions, or as like conversations between you and your manager. So you would be an individual contributor or someone who has a manager. You might be a manager yourself, but you have a manager, or you might manage people, but you still have someone you're reporting to. And so the quote I just put for this is, it sounds to me like your primary concern is quality regardless of timeline. That's aligning on priorities. That ties into goals, but it's really asking questions and making sure you're aligned on what is truly important. That's a great question to ask, because it's super important to know those types of things so that you can manage your own work. So aligning on priorities is very important. Align on deliverables. Anytime that you're in a meeting, in a discussion, if you're halfway through a project and you don't know exactly what your deliverables are when, you should align on those things. A great question to ask if you're in a conversation, if you're in a Slack conversation, if you're in a meeting with a bunch of people is there anything you're expecting from me after this conversation? Because maybe the answer, if you think the answer is no, maybe the answer is yes, and they're expecting some deliverable from that. Either just like to respond to an email or to do some research on something and provide that back. So aligning aligning on deliverables, making sure that if someone expects something of you, you know it, or if you expect something of your manager or someone else, that they know it, right? If you're expecting them to provide something to you and so that you can do your work and you're blocked, you need to make sure that they know their deliverables as well. So aligning on expectations is a very similar way to put that. Number 4, for managing up, communicate. We're going to have a whole section on communication really quick. I need to keep moving through this quickly, but we're going to have a whole section on this later, so I'm not going to jump into it. But communicate. However much you're communicating, double it, triple it, whatever it is, you probably need to communicate more. Lastly, just a final quote here. Managing up is not an event. It's an ongoing process that, when done right, can be very rewarding. Treat it as an investment, not overhead. Managing up is an investment into your career. If you manage up, if you learn how to do this, it will level you up and it will allow you to play at levels in your industry or in your career that you never dreamed that you could play at. It's truly incredible what it can do for your career. Makes you just an incredibly valuable person. Again, like this is another quote from the same site. I've pulled a couple from a couple sites that were just incredibly helpful. I'll drop those links in the chat later, or Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, maybe I'll put them there because they were really helpful. Okay, big point number 2, take ownership. I really like the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL. He says leaders must own everything in their world. There's no one else to blame. I really appreciate this mindset. As an individual contributor or as a leader, you see leaders in here like, maybe I'm not a leader. Maybe I'm just a guy at the end of the assembly line, or a gal at the end of the assembly line who's just putting widgets together and building stuff. I think you should be a leader of everyone around you in the way that you can, but you should also be a leader of yourself in your own career. So I think this mindset applies to everyone, whether you're in a leadership position technically, or whether you're just trying to lead your own career. That's what we're talking about here today, taking ownership and leading your own career. Don't leave anyone else to blame about your career not going in the way you want it to. Sometimes things are going to happen that are out of your control, but all you can do is take ownership of the things that you can control, versus complain about the things that are out of your control. Sometimes it's really unfortunate, but the way to move past those things and the way to move forward is to take ownership. This is what we just talked about. You can be the victim of a bad boss, toxic situation, dysfunctional organization, or you can decide to own your career and life. A lot of people will tell me like, oh yeah, I could be productive, but I have a terrible boss. It's like, okay, manage up. Like, hey, your boss never tells you what to do. Manage up, ask questions, make sure that you get the information you need, probe hard. They don't ever tell you what their goals are. You have to ask, you have to mine those things out. So you can either just sit back and be in a bad organization with, those problems that annoy you, or you can, jump in and own those things and kind of take control of your career. So this is more on a personal note. This is much less like for me as a manager, what I want from people. This is what I think has helped me a lot and what I think can help anyone. I've been in situations where the lead on the project was not what they should be and not managing it in the way that they should. And, the only way to handle that is to either just go with the flow and let the project and the team fail, or let your life be miserable because you don't know what you need to be doing, or the deadlines are too short, or whatever it is, or you can start to take ownership of those things. So I think it's really important to have that kind of ownership mindset, take ownership of what you can, kind of the serenity prayer of leadership. Maybe I'll tweet a serenity prayer of leadership. Okay, so talking about owning things. So we're going to talk about a couple different points of things you can own. First one is own clarity. Own getting clarity on things. So if you're in a meeting and you don't have clarity, take ownership of that. Take ownership of it for the team if you need to, and say, hey, I don't think our team has clarity on where we're going. That should really be the job of your lead. But if it's not happening, you have to clarify it for the team so that you know what you individually need to be doing. Sometimes you have to kind of do it for more than yourself so that you can get everyone on the same page so that you can do your role well. So sometimes you end up kind of doing your manager's job if they're not doing it well, or if they're not plugged in as much as they should be, or whatever. But sometimes you have to kind of go outside of your sphere of influence to clarify things, to get the information you need to be able to exceed just in your own arena. So sometimes that has to happen. Is it unfortunate? Maybe. Should your manager be doing it and allowing you to kind of stay in your lane? Probably. But even then, even with a great manager, you have to take ownership of these pieces. So number one is own clarity. Couple of different ways to think about this is asking a question like, who's in charge of this chunk of the project? If you don't understand, hey, is it me? Is this something I'm supposed to be doing? Ask questions like that. Or, hey, this piece of this project, this piece of the puzzle doesn't make sense to me. Can we make sure we stop and get clarity before we move on? Take ownership of making sure that you understand what's happening and you're not in the dark figuring things out on your own, and it'll improve your life for sure. That's a really big one. Number two, own the process. Once you've been given instructions and you understand what you need to do, understand, hey, I need you to make a website, or I need you to whatever it is. Own the process of getting that from start to finish and make sure that you understand what things need to happen. Maybe there's a launch that needs to happen and you need to make sure that you have the DNS so you can set the domain when you get there. Own the process. Make sure that you understand what needs to happen once you understand where you're starting, where you're going, take ownership of the steps that need to happen for you to get there, and make sure that you know what you need from other people, including your manager at the beginning of that process, so that you avoid, those roadblocks 2 days from the deadline that inevitably pop up. Number three, own the outcome. You need to own the outcomes of your projects. If you want to produce good work, you have to take ownership over that. And if you're working with other people, sometimes that means holding them accountable. So I've got a little example in here of you talking to a teammate. You say, hey, the expectation of our team is that products are going to be accessible. So we need to go back to the drawing board and bring this feature up to our standard. Hey, maybe this isn't accessible. Maybe it doesn't work with screen readers, whatever it is. You have to own the outcome and the quality of your work. And sometimes that means owning other people's work that plays into yours as well. And this is where learning to be a good team player is really important, and make sure that you can communicate these types of things. You'll see that the language I bring here is very much teamwork language. It's saying, our team has an expectation and we have a standard and we expect everyone to get to that standard. But this isn't about you being a bad developer as a teammate. It isn't about you missing a mark individually. It's about the team needs to produce at a high level and the team needs to produce quality work. And I'm going to own that outcome, even if it's not my work, but I'm also not going to be a jerk about it. So the language in here is intentionally very much like team goal language. Number four, own communication. Mark Sanborn said, in teamwork, silence is not golden, it's deadly. You have to take ownership of making sure that you're communicating. And we're going to talk about this. I have like 4 slides about communication before we actually get to the section. But we're coming up to that fast. So I'll save it for then, but we'll dig in a little bit more on that. But own communication, make sure that you understand when you need to communicate, if you're communicating well, if your manager is communicating well, and if not, make sure that you kind of pull that communication from them. So this is about owning communication. If your project is on track, but your manager doesn't know it's on track, is it really on track? It's like if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears something. I don't actually know that quote that well. Anyway, if your project is on track and no one knows it's on track, that's it's not as bad, but it's almost as bad as your project not being on track. It's almost as bad as your project being behind, because managers are running a million sub processes in their mind all the time, thinking about, is this on track? Is this on track? They know they have maybe 10 projects with 3 different teams going at the same time or whatever it is. And they're always wondering, and they're always needing to check in and make sure that those things are on track. And if you can just let your manager know, hey, we're 1 week into a 2-week project, it's going great, we're ahead of schedule, we're on track, that makes you a person that your manager can give stuff to, know that they're going to know the status of it without having to go check. And that is incredibly, incredibly valuable. So don't just be on track. Don't just hit timelines. Make sure your manager knows that you're on track. You're going to hit your deadlines, the status. Or if you're behind, make sure they know that as well. Just communicate and be honest about that. Hey, this is probably looks like we're not going to be on track. And so we either need some additional resources or we're going to need to push the launch or whatever it is. We'll talk about a little bit more about deadlines, I think, later. Number 5, own your failures and growth. If you fail, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, if something inside or outside of your control happens that leads to you not delivering on time, to you not delivering at the quality that you were supposed to, you need to own that, and you need to own growing and making sure it doesn't happen again. Again, the important thing isn't everyone being perfect all the time. It's your team succeeding at the things that they set out to do. So here's a couple different ways to think about that. You talking to your manager, hey, it was my responsibility to know that feature of the site wasn't ready. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Here is what I've done to make sure we catch an issue like that next time. So it's not saying, hey, I'm a terrible person, I did something wrong, I messed up, but it's saying, hey, I understand this is in my realm of responsibility. Hey, maybe something happened. Maybe one of your coworkers or one of your reports, maybe you have a manager, but then you also have some people on your team and you're the team lead or whatever it is, didn't do what they were supposed to do. The buck stops with you. You're the person in charge of making sure that your project is up to quality. Maybe it was just your bad code, maybe it's someone else's, but whatever. But all managers want that there was an issue with this. And here's what I'm doing to make sure it doesn't happen again. No one has a problem with failure. Toxic teams do, and they'll try to put blame on people. But taking ownership will often reduce the amount of times that people can blame you, because they won't feel like blaming you is important, because they're going to say, hey, this guy messed up. And you're going to say, yeah, I did. I'm sorry. And here's what we've got in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. So representing failure as not the end of the world, but something that you can learn from and grow from, and then actually making sure you grow from it by putting things in place so that it doesn't happen again is really, really important. Kind of the same thing with even just little interpersonal things. Hey, sorry I was for a meeting. Sorry I missed our one-on-one. Sorry I whatever. I've set a reminder on my phone to make sure that I don't forget again in the future. That is the most comforting thing in the world to hear as a manager is, hey, I know this X thing happened that wasn't good. Here's why, what I've done to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then that just makes me understand that you understand the issue, because you've already put something in place. You're already owning the problem and owning the solution. So that's really, really important. Owning your failures. Failure happens. It's always going to happen. You're always going to have failures, and learning how to own them and grow from them is just incredibly important, especially early career. The faster you can from it early in your career, the faster you'll get to the point where those failures aren't catastrophic. They don't feel catastrophic to you, but being able to kind of have them. Lastly, kind of to summarize the topic of ownership, high functioning teams don't have use for people who can't take ownership. If you require babysitting, your organizational value will always be limited. This sounds really, really harsh, but if you require babysitting, you cannot be a top contributor on a team. No manager in the world is going to hire people for high level, high producing teams that pay well, that do really impactful work, that require babysitting. You have to learn to own things. You have to learn to be the person that I can hand something to and say, hey, here's my expectation. Here's what needs to happen. Here's the timeline it needs to happen on. And I know that that's either going to get done or be communicated about to me why it can't get done, or, just be owned all the way through to the final endpoint. That's super important. It's probably the most important thing you can do for your career. I tweeted about this talk yesterday and asked people for kind of their advice. And my good friend, Jason Siffering, tweeted back and said, do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. Everything else is learnable. I think that's really important. I think that kind of summarizes the whole topic. If you can be this person, you can pretty much do anything you want in your career. Everything else is learnable. Code is learnable. Everything else is learnable. But being that person who does what you say you're going to do, who's responsible and takes ownership, is one of the, probably in my mind, the most important thing you can do for your career. Okay, number 3. This one's a little bit more fun. The last one was maybe a little bit of a Debbie Downer if you're not good at those things naturally. So I also realize I'm maybe cutting close on time here, so I'm going to move quickly through this, but this one's really fun and important. No one can advocate you in your organization better than yourself. You're the only person who knows what you've done, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and can really advocate to say, hey, I'm really crushing it in this area. Hey, I did this thing that helps our team, and make your organization understand your value. And you can't just assume that your manager or anyone else in the organization is paying enough attention to you, maybe until that, yearly review or whatever comes around. You have to make sure people understand your value, and you have to represent that yourself. This can be really uncomfortable, especially if you're a little bit more introverted, a little bit more just like a super humble personality, and you don't want to tell people I did something good. So I'm going to have some practical tips, especially for kind of that type personality, but it's really important to do this. If you want to move up in your career through your company or move to another company, people have to know that you're good at stuff, and people have to know that you can own things. People have to know those things. And unless you tell them, they might not figure it out. The only person who knows that super well is yourself. So tweet again, got another tweet about this. It was really helpful. Jordana said, learn to advocate for yourself and find those who will advocate for you. Be thankful and gracious and pay it forward. And I think that really frames this discussion really well. Okay, the first way to do this, track your accomplishments. I would say do this at least every month. Sit down at the end of your month and see what you accomplished that month. That's 12 times a year. It's very doable. Set a reminder for yourself the last Friday of the month or the last Monday of the month, whatever it is, to just write down everything that you did that month. So it might look like this. I launched 3 websites. I made 10 podcasts and things, saying saving us 100 hours a year. Maybe if you documented a deployment process, or you refined a deployment process, or something everyone on your team does, you can save your team a ton of money, a ton of time by doing those types of things. And so sometimes the most important things to document are the things outside of your direct role. So maybe you're just a web developer, right? Launch 3 websites is like, okay, sweet. Maybe everyone else on the team launched 2. So that's a very valuable metric as well. But the things that your manager doesn't know would be the types of things like documentation, pairing with people. Hey, maybe you pair 3 times a week with someone on your team and get them unblocked. That's an incredible amount organization to have someone on the team who can mentor people and grow them in that way. And you need to make sure you can represent that well. And your manager isn't going to know those things unless you tell them, or unless one of your teammates tells them, which they should be doing if they really value your work. But at the same time, they might not know to do it. We'll cover that later. Know and show your.
Sorry to interrupt. About two or 3 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll
sorry,
move.
man. Yeah.
Nope. Sounds good. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.
Sure, you bet.
Okay, so number 3, share what you learn. This is kind of that learn in public, grow in public type mindset. And so make sure as you're learning, they are giving other people visibility to that. That one will help your coworkers learn as well, but it'll also allow people to see this person's growing, this person is if you did something awesome, make sure that people know about it. And you don't have to represent it as like, hey, check out how good I am, but make sure that you are just post it and say, hey, I built something really cool. I'm proud of it. I'm excited about it. And I wanted everyone to see it. Last piece on this, advocate for your team members as well as yourself. So if you see someone on your team doing a great job, or someone maybe a little bit more senior than you pairs up with you and they help you on a project, make sure that you tell your manager or their manager, whoever it is, hey, Jen was really helpful on a call today. I just wanted to let you know she's so good at that. She helps me a couple times a week. That can really kind of do what you wish people would do for you in that same way. I think our last big point here is about communication. So when you're communicating, you want to over communicate. I think if you're thinking you're over communicating, you're probably not. Most people don't over communicate. And I think one thing people do on this front is that they keep things that they think might not be helpful to themselves, because they only want to communicate the really important things. The quote on this I really appreciate was, when you communicate proactively, when you over communicate, you give your leaders up the chain of command the gift of choice to either act on the information, store it as notes, or not do anything with it. I am totally fine hearing something from a direct report that I don't need to know, but it's just helpful or cool to know, or it's a good touch point. But oftentimes they'll tell me something they don't think is important, but actually really is to me. It helps me to understand their role or their priorities or whatever it is on the team. Push and pull communication. I'm going to move really quickly through these last few, but push and pull is really important. Just try to grasp this concept of pushing communication up to your manager versus them having to come down and pull it from you. So an example of that is just say, hey, I'm halfway done with this. I want to let you know I'm going to wrap it up with plenty of time to spare, versus a manager having to come and check in with you and say, hey, is your project on time? I haven't heard anything. That's you pushing communication versus your manager having to pull it from you. One of the most important things you can do is push more communication. 3 is ask more questions. However many you're asking, ask more. A couple of tips for asking questions: spend a time boxed amount of time on an issue. Say, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on this. If I don't know the answer at the end, I'm going to ask a question. That can really help you kind of frame questions. If you ask someone a question, just tell them, hey, here's what I did to figure it out up to this point, so they can rule out those things. And they might say, oh, that's awesome, you were so close to figuring it out. Or they might say, oh, that's not how I would approach it. And you get to learn from the way they're going to debug or learn things. That one's not super important. I'm going to move past it. And then and asking questions or communicating, just validate what you hear. So if someone tells you something and you're not sure that you're on the same page, say something like, hey, what I'm hearing you say is your priority for this project is an MVP, even if that means cutting some features. And that will make sure that they know you understand it, as well as just clarify, because they might say, no, we can't cut any features and we have our deadline and you have to figure out how to deal with that, which would be another organizational problem I can't solve in this talk. And then communicate consistently. If you're not a natural communicator, set reminders, say, hey, every Monday at the end of the day, I'm going to let my manager know where my projects are at or whatever it is. Give yourself some cues to kind of handle that. That's because I know I've gone a little bit over time. I appreciate you guys being patient with me. Todd, thanks for the heads up on time. And I guess I don't need my "is this talk over yet" caption. But anyway, I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for hanging out with me. I will hope to jump in the QA maybe at the end if we have time, but I'll go ahead and hand it over to David.